Hello and welcome to The Two Trees. I'm your host, John Dillon, with a whole bunch of other people. My good friend, Jacob Kessling.
Yes, sir.
The Right Reverend Monsignor Nick Church.
What's going on?
And also Martin Listener.
Hey, all.
Well, we are here, my friends, to talk about angels, to talk about demons, ghosts, the pagan gods, and the weird corners of the Bible. We're here to talk about the beliefs of the ancient world, the way that they talked about the supernatural world, all to help you understand the people and cultures of the Bible, to help you to engage in a deeper level with the text of Scripture. But more important than any of that stuff, we want to show you Jesus. As Deuteronomy 10:17 describes him, the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome. Can I get an amen?
That's
Amen.
right.
No, right. I have to ask for them, but I'm going to count them anyway. Well, guys, we are back after our most successful month ever. God has opened lots of doors for us. We're in over 50 countries, have taken the time to listen to us ramble, and we've talked about all kinds of weird things, from Leviathan to Goliath and angels and principalities and powers, and today we're talking about witchcraft.
A lot of good feedback on, or good comments and feedback on Facebook as well.
Yeah, how is our Facebook doing there, Martin?
Doing really well, honestly. Over 350 members now. If you want to become one yourself, just go to Facebook and type in Two Trees Podcast. We should be the first thing that comes up. The great little emblem that John created there, or maybe it was Nick created.
Totally Nick.
With the two golden trees there. Same one you're looking at on your device right now. Join, become a member. It's free to do so. We'd love to have you. We've had a lot of great conversation. Just in the last couple days or so, we've had several people talking about our latest episode with the Asbury stuff. And also a really good idea for a podcast that we should do, which I believe we're going to get into tonight. So Gordon's son, shout out to you for bringing this one up to us, and we're going to dive right into it. So if anybody else has great ideas that they want to see, I mean, post it out there, and we'll be happy to get right on it.
Hey, Graham Thornburg asked when we're doing another Facebook Live. I love Graham, but I think this is a setup. That's all I'm going to say. I think that he's waiting for our next Facebook so he can, I don't know. I think he's going to sabotage me somehow.
It's a trap.
It's a trap. That's right. Anyway, we wasn't going to do our next Facebook Live. And I said, well, we typically, when questions are asked that we don't want to necessarily do just a podcast on, we can jump on and do a live.
Yeah, we haven't really set up any kind of a pattern for the Facebook Live. We don't really have much of a pattern for anything. We're only a couple months old. And basically, we come out to the barn and go, so,
What do you want to talk about?
what are we doing? And I say, well, I just happen to have this outline I've been working on.
Yeah,
And they all
just
sit
so
around
happen.
and critique it.
Yeah, none of us read it, but he has one. It's great.
I send it
Speak
out
for
every week.
yourself.
I know,
and
sorry.
they ignore it. And they're
I
like,
don't read
know.
it. I acknowledge it's there. Is that enough? Anyway,
I'll take that, yes.
it'll be great.
So today we're talking, Gordon asked us about a weird word called Teraphim. And maybe this is a word that you're familiar with, and maybe it's a word that you're not, but it connects to the idea of reaching into the other world, of family gods and familiar spirits. And as we've been talking, the last couple episodes have been kind of gearing towards, what does the supernatural world around us look like? We know that God created two types of worlds, a physical world and a spiritual world. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And on the earth, he placed mankind. He placed Adam and Eve and all sorts of other wonderful creatures, and God told us to have dominion, to rule over this place, to care for, to protect, and to expand the garden-like qualities of Eden. And in the supernatural world, there are creatures that we would call angels, as the giant catch-all term. How many different species of angels there are, we have no idea, but I imagine it's just as creative as God's attempt to populate the physical earth was. And we know that there are lots of different types of spirits, and some of them are good, and some of them have rebelled against God, just as humanity did. And we were swept up in this multi-world rebellion against God that is the battle between sin and righteousness. And throughout the Bible, we find people who are pursuing God, and we also find people who are using the things of God for their own benefit. And one of those guys in the Bible is a man called Saul. He's the first king of Israel, and he's a good-looking guy. He's tall, he's powerful. The ladies, they love Saul. He's a popular man, but he also is a weak ruler. He is the kind of person who chooses the things of this world over the things of God. And throughout his reign, he has a pillar that he leans on, a person whose name is Samuel. And Samuel is the last of the judges from the book of Judges. He has a direct line to God. God is speaking to him as a representative of his divine court on the earth. And once Samuel is gone, Saul continues to spiral into evil patterns. And it culminates in an event which most Christians know as the Witch of Endor. And when I hear the word Endor, I immediately think of Ewoks and that kind of thing. But this is a much older word than that. And it's a place in the mountains of Israel. And what Samuel was offering to Saul was spiritual counsel. He was his connection to the spiritual world. And so whenever Saul had a problem or a question, he would go and talk to Samuel. Well, when Samuel died, Saul seems to have gone off the reservation a little bit. He was willing to find answers wherever they were. And in the story, he actually goes and finds a necromancer, someone who traffics in communicating with the dead. And he wants to talk to Samuel. And he goes to this woman, and she actually stirs up the supernatural world, and out pops Samuel with really, really bad news. And when most people read this story, they're all kinds of confused. I thought ghosts were made up. Is this a demon? Is this really Samuel? Who is this woman? What is going on? And how did Saul know to even ask for this person? And really the reason for that is because there's a pretty big cultural gap between modern Western Christianity and the religion of ancient Bronze Age Israel. They were swimming in the cultural river of their time, and there were things that were common in the ancient world that aren't common today. We've talked about how going up a mountain or up to a high place was a way of physically is what I'm trying to say, reaching out into the supernatural world, just like a Christian might kneel down on their knees or lift their hands in prayer. It's a way of physically expressing your love for God and your desire to reach into the supernatural world. Sometimes we might fast to do the same thing, to show that we're separating ourselves from the needs of the physical in our attempt to approach the spiritual.
Yeah, I noticed that, like, one of the things I've been talking today with my wife was that fasting has to have some kind of connection, in the sense that I think we were reading Mark chapter 9 on Sunday in our Sunday school class, and we were talking about the child that was going into seizures and falling into the fire, those type of things, and they couldn't cast this demon out. And he said this one only comes out through fasting and prayer.
Yeah, and that's not because your prayers are louder if you're fasting.
I know, but I've been just asking, weird question. I'm like, what does not eating have to do with the spiritual world?
There is a connection.
There is.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that
some people are weirded out by that. We like our foods not to touch on the plate. We want to keep the physical world over here, and physical stuff doesn't matter.
One
Food does
item
not
at a
touch on
time.
the plate.
You're not a big fan of soup, huh?
No, amen.
Oh, man.
Casseroles, no, not doing that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You're missing out on some wonderful things.
No,
like
I used to
biscuits and gravy.
I used to. Well, there's certain foods you
It all
can
goes to the
mix,
same place, guys. All goes to the same
but
place.
it has to get past the gate.
Yeah,
It has
it's
to go
true.
through my mouth to get to my stomach.
Yeah.
All
My
right.
dad used to put everything just right in one glop. And I used to get sick just watching him eat, because that was that. Shout out to Dad. Sorry, but I remember that growing up.
Is this
one
not our
pile.
first mention of your dad, is it? Because he's way better than that.
It's people like Martin where they have those paper plates that have
Yes.
segments in them.
Best part of Thanksgiving when you got
absolutely,
one of those, so you can keep everything.
Keep
in
the
one
gravy
spot.
off of my.
Well, believe it or not, the supernatural world and the physical world do overlap.
Yeah, it's true.
There are places and there are times where the places between them are very thin, where you have instances where, like when Jesus is baptized and you hear the voice of God speak out of the heavens. There's the time when Jesus goes up the Mount of Transfiguration and Moses and Elijah are there.
Mm-hmm.
They're dead. Like, they've been gone a long time. What are they doing there? And I hear Christians say, well, ghosts aren't part of the biblical story, and then they have no problem admitting that Moses and Elijah were up there. Well, a ghost is the disembodied spirit of a human being, and they're not in heaven. They're down there talking to Jesus. There is a connection in which the soul of a human being is a lot more powerful and able to do more things than we might be comfortable with in our Sunday school theology.
Right. That word wasn't made up when Jesus was walking on the water and they thought they saw let's make a ghost.
Yeah, they knew what this was.
Yeah.
But to us, it has all the connotations of Casper, the friendly ghost. And, you didn't go into the light. You've watched Poltergeist one too many times. And so what Christians are trying to do is to separate themselves from worldly explanations of the supernatural world. And I think that's a good thing. But it is not a good thing if you're explaining away the text of Scripture.
But I think it's only done in certain aspects by us, like when we don't want it to happen. I get the example that popped in my head is The Lion King. When Simba looks up and he sees Mufasa in the sky, right? And it's like, oh, yeah, that's great because we want his dad to be able to tell him how he should live his life and stuff. So when it's like a good thing or a wholesome thing, the example you used, when they're talking to Jesus there, it's like, yeah, I could believe that, because it sounds good. It feels good. It's wholesome. And it's like, yeah,
Right.
that makes sense.
Well, here's the deal. When a human dies, they don't stop being a human. You don't become an angel. You don't get put in spiritual jail. You are more alive in that way than you've ever been before. You are part of the supernatural world and still part of God's plan and his purposes. And a disembodied human is going to do whatever God wants it to do. And if that means, hey, go down there and stand next to Jesus on the mountain, that's what you do. In this instance, we get Samuel talking out of a pit. And it's creepy as you can imagine. This is a really creepy story. And it got more creepy the more I studied it. I eventually had to stop and just pull away because it was taking me down a dark place in my mind and pulled into a nice, safe Jesus zone. I'll go back to it later.
Well, if that doesn't get people ready to listen, I don't know what will.
I don't know, man. It did. Like, I guess when I hear, like, the Witch of Endor, first, I think it's because the name Endor, to my mind, is comical. It's the little Ewoks running around in the end of the Death Star and all that stuff. And a witch is connected to childhood stories. But a witch
Wizard of Oz,
yes. Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
The green
yes,
witch, wicked witch of the West.
That's right.
This is someone who has made a pact with an evil supernatural being. That's what this is. And this
in return, they have some kind of supernatural power to do something.
And we know that
something.
supernatural beings do have power. When Sennacherib invades Israel, an angel just lays waste to the invading army, and one angel turns them back. We have instances of angels who are very, very powerful. We also have demonic elements of that. When the miracles or the plagues are happening in Egypt, the priests are mirroring the things that God is doing. There is a demonic power that exists.
Yep.
And so God asks us not to engage in these things, not because they're not real, but because they are real. There are forbidden things, places we ought not be sticking our nose because we don't know really what's on the other side of the curtain, so to speak. And one of the things that people did all across the ancient Middle East, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, up into Greece, is there was a fascination with the dead. You honored your dead relatives. You wanted to speak to those people who had died and the forces that shepherded the dead. And to do that, you didn't reach up into the heavens. You didn't go up to a high place. You went down into a valley or down into a cave. And one of the most common ways of doing this was to dig an artificial grave. There would be a man or a woman who was like a priest of this chthonic deity, this evil, this underworld being. And they would go out and they would find a, quote, quote, sacred spot. And they would dig a pit, either of the size of a grave, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. And this unholy site would be established. It would be outside the city, somewhere hidden. And what they would more or less do is they would attempt to open a portal from the realm of the underworld to the world of the living. And they would act as the guardian or the priest to officiate ceremonies. These people are connected to the word Ab, and it means the lady of the pit, or really the woman who serves the lady of the pit. And that's all kinds of creepy, or at least I thought so. The idea of a woman or a man whose job is to open and close portals to the dead, to the damned. And there are voices and there are beings who are speaking to them and are either claiming to be the ghosts of the dead, in which case they could be demonic beings or fallen angels or possible Nephilim. You don't know what they are because you don't have the ability to tell the difference. But there are supernatural connections being made. Emily Dickinson has a great podcast called Faith and Other Oddities, and she has a series on this, and I would recommend it to you. And in them, she talks about a man named Harry Hoffner who wrote an article called Second Millennium Antecedents to the Hebrew word Ab, which sounds like riveting reading. And I read it today, and it was really interesting, and it also freaked me out really bad. And so I stopped reading it and picked it back up. We're going to link it onto our Facebook page, so if any of you Hebrew grammar people are out there and you want to just spend a lovely afternoon reading some light, happy reading, you can check this out. But more or less what it said is that this is how this worked. A priest, a wizard, or a witch, whatever you want to call them, would take ceremonial tools. Sometimes it was like a silver shovel or hoe. Sometimes it was daggers. And they would dig out a grave or a hole, a pit, to the underworld. They would then pour blood or beer or milk into the pit. Sometimes they would actually crawl down in the pit and kill an animal and let the blood just pour out over the floor, and the animal would be offered as a sacrifice to the dead. But that was an attempt to give life-giving power to whatever is going to crawl up out of this grave in an attempt to speak to the people. A lot of times they would lower down a ladder that would be blessed or have like runes carved into it, and they would lower that ladder down into the pit so that whatever crawled up out of the hole would have a way to ascend up onto the platform where everyone was talking. And they would lower that down, and when the ceremony was over, they would take the ladder out, or they would put a stone over top of the pit or a cloth over top of the pit to close the connection or to close the portal.
So this is the point where you use this is where I start thinking, this is all symbolism. Like this didn't really happen. They did all these things, but nothing really ever came out. But I'm thinking okay, why would they practice these things if something did not happen? I mean, eventually 5 or 10 times of someone trying it and it's not happening. This must have really been something happened with these rituals that caused a connection with this other world that other people wanted to do it. Saul, didn't he banish all of these individuals? And of course,
what he seems to have done is outlawed the pits.
Okay.
He made it illegal for people to be digging these pits. The necromancers are still out there. And this lady seems to have been operating in secret. But not a very good secret, because everyone in Saul's court knows where she is.
Yeah, almost like they've maybe visited. I'm just thinking, what would they need to know? Why would they want a connection? I guess for me on a sentimental side, if my wife dies, I mean, I would love to connect with her again, those kind of things. But now it'd be what's the password to the bank account if it's a grandparent? I mean, I'm just making stuff up, but why would they want to connect with their ancestors? For wisdom, for
wisdom, for blessing.
Just want to be with them.
To say to your ancestor, hey, you who dwell in the supernatural world, take a message to the chief god and ask him to bless our endeavor. Or we're opening a new business. Go find the god of fortune and go and do this thing. And so they were worshiping these gods, but they were also caring for the dead as though they were alive. They were offering drink offerings to these beings to feed them, to give them power. And the idea is it was in the Greek world, the Mesopotamian world, the Egyptian world. It was all over the place. And it's got to be, I think, because it worked.
Yep.
There were, even today, we have the Ouija board, right? And whether you think yes or no about the Ouija board, one of the first things people will tell you is make sure you end the session. Don't leave it open. You've opened a portal in your home. You have to close these things, because leaving open portals in your life.
Don't use Ouija boards.
Yeah, don't use Ouija boards. Nick, you ever use a Ouija board?
No.
You watched the movie.
I watched the movies.
I was terrified of them, and I wasn't even walking with the Lord. I'm not playing with that I ain't standing in front of the mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times in the dark. I ain't doing it. I ain't played around with that stuff.
Well, and I think part of it has to do not with a power necessarily in the board itself or in other things, but in the intent behind it. There are things that want very much to communicate, but they require permission to do so. They require you to open doors because God has placed around us hedges of protection because we walk in blindness. If someone says, hey, I'm the ghost of your great Aunt Susie, I don't know that. I don't know that. It could be anyone or anything presenting itself as that.
Because they disguise themselves.
They disguise themselves, and there's the possibility of beings of great power. And one of the words here that's actually used in this story is Yideonim, and that means the knowing ones, the beings who know. You would go find one of these women, one of these Yideonim, or at the pit, and this was a person who had hidden knowledge that was given to them by the supernatural world. And it's talked about as though this is just as real as rocks. This was a part of the ancient world. Martin, you look like you got a thought.
Yeah, there's a thought that came into my mind when you were mentioning how these powers may say that they're Aunt Susie, but they could be anything. In today's world, when you have the internet, think of how many scammers there are out there claiming that they're somebody else trying to get information from you, right? And it's like, man, where did anybody first get that idea to scam somebody online when you can't see this person, but you can communicate through them? And, you have to open up a way for them to communicate to you. It's almost a direct analogy to what you're talking about. But what I was going to mention is how would these people, like the witch or the lady of the pit, how would they first know how to prepare these ceremonies and stuff?
Well, they would be taught by another priest or priestess, but honestly, the idea comes down to the Nephilim. The story of the Watchers when they fell is they brought hidden knowledge, and this seems to have been passed down from generation to generation.
So I was doing some reading earlier today, and actually, the word Endor actually means springs of generations.
Does it?
Yeah.
That's cool.
So just to back up,
Yeah,
what you
so
were
that
saying,
carries that idea of generations or
Yeah.
of ancestors.
Yeah,
That's creepy.
it is.
Yeah, I told you I skipped out, man. I was really getting freaked out by
Good,
some
yeah,
of this.
that's good.
I mean, I read a lot about it. I'm days and
That
days
article is
into
I
this
was reading it too, and it got even as detailed as to when they were in the pit and they were sacrificing. They actually had certain ways that they would even cut the animal. It wasn't cut up,
if you
it was cut down
up, that was the idea of I'm offering this sacrifice towards the heavens. But if you were offering this to the beasts of the earth, you slashed it down.
Yeah.
And this was a way. There was all kinds of
was an interesting
symbolism
article.
about this. It's what we would call magic. It's what we would call meddling in the occult, and it exists. It exists today. Are there people who fake this stuff? You bet. Probably more now than ever because there's more human beings out there than ever. But that doesn't mean that there aren't real instances of this happening. And in Saul's day, it was very common. Go ahead.
What was if they're conjuring up some kind of ghost or spirit or whatever, what would be the benefit of that spirit, connecting or answering questions or, doing what they're asking kind of thing? What would be to their benefit?
To the ghost?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I know sometimes like some of these spirits want, are longing for a body to reside in, or I just was wondering, like, now that we can conjure something out here, what says they're going to answer my questions, or what's to their benefit?
There were spells placed. There was also there were gifts given. They were given worship. They were given offerings. They were given sacrifice.
Okay.
And we're just not told how that affects the supernatural world, how the spilling of blood into the pit gives honor or power to a spiritual being. And I think that's a good thing that God didn't tell us those things.
I'm blown away that this process can call up Samuel.
Well, we're going to get to that. I think this is kind of one of my favorite elements of this story.
But that's a great question. I love it. Like, what's in it for these guys? They're stronger. They're more powerful. They have more knowledge, whatever. Why do they want our offerings of a dead goat or something like that?
Well, when it talks about the Nephilim, the idea is that they don't want to be forgotten. They still desire to exercise power. They still desire to be influence on the earth. And there are things that they may, especially for the watchers and things, they long to be freed
Well, and like
from their prisons.
like you mentioned, the worship, we don't know what that means in the spiritual realm when we worship down here. And you talk about, well, we worship God and this, that, and the other, but in the I wills of Satan, and then when Satan is tempting Jesus, like all he wants from Jesus is for him to bow down and worship him.
Mm.
So there has to be some extreme significance to worship in the spiritual realms. Like, what's in it for them? I think they just want authority over us, or that worship to them.
It
It's gotta
definitely
mean
places
something.
you in debt to the Spirit. It also places you under the authority of that Spirit, whatever it is that comes out to speak. If it's a spiritual human or another type of spirit, there is the danger of we don't know what we're giving up. We don't know how that affects us. We don't know what we're losing by influence, by giving power to these beings in our lives, or what we're getting in exchange for this message. And this isn't an uncommon phrase. It's used quite a few times in the Bible, but it always has the idea of the manipulation of ghosts, the knowing ones, those who are seeking forbidden knowledge. And the phrase here is Yede Onim. And in my mind, it has to do with the idea of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I want to know something that is forbidden. And I have to choose whether to trust God or to seek to know it myself. I need an answer to this God. I won't step in faith. I must understand before I'm willing to follow. And that seems to have been Saul. When he's held to the fire, he does okay. But you give him any sort of leeway, and he's going to break rules left and right.
Yeah.
Because to him, it is about explain yourself, God, and if you have a good enough reason, I'll obey. And I think that, not to get into the application part of this, but
It sounds like a
holy
lot of
smokes,
us. Yeah.
that's how we operate.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do this, God, so long as I get to vote on whether
Right.
this is a good idea or not. And if you won't tell me, I'll find other people who will, or other spirits who will. And so Saul goes into this conversation, and he's swearing by the God Yahweh to this woman
It's
who has sworn allegiance
hilarious.
to the lady of the pit. That one of these things
but that
ought
was
not
good enough
be
for
with the other.
that was good for her though.
Yeah,
like,
well, it's
that
because
was
she
enough.
recognized, oh, okay, well, that deity doesn't lie.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to swear by him, that's a good oath. She doesn't seem to have known who this was at the time. There are lots of these examples in the Bible, or not in the Bible, but in the ancient world. The two most famous instances of this, one of them happens in the Odyssey, which is a really famous book by Homer, and the other one happens in the book called Gilgamesh. And those are not the same culture, but they describe almost the same thing, this pit with a priest who is offering an offering to the dead, and that dead rises through the grave that's there. The most famous instance of this in history is a place called Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi. Maybe you watched the movie 300. At the beginning of the movie 300, they go to the Oracle at Delphi. All throughout ancient history, people were going to the Oracle at Delphi to get knowledge, to get hidden information. And if she gave you her blessing, that was considered gospel, because that was a spirit who spoke the truth. And we're going to come back to her at the very end of this story. But the oracles, these priestesses or priests, wizards, witches, whatever word you want to use for it, this is not something that's way out in left field in the ancient world. This is paganism. This is the world that was around Israel all the time. And it's the world that they grew up in. And so this isn't something that they didn't know. But to us, it sounds weird as all get out, because we don't encounter that kind of thing very often. This is a cultural norm then, but it's not a cultural norm now. The Bible has a lot to say about persons who were seeking hidden knowledge from the realm of the dead and the spirits of darkness. And we're going to look at a couple examples of these. And so if you guys don't mind taking a minute and going to the book of Zechariah, chapter 10 and verse 2, we're gonna look at this because it has to do with, were people really trying to talk to familiar spirits? And the answer is yes. They did this through the pits. They also did this through, and this, Gordon, is where your question comes in, through an object called a Teraphim, which was like a personal connection to the gods or the spirits of your family. and they're called Teraphim, and they're small idols. In some cases, they're really big, but we're going to look at this. The Bible sometimes just straight up translates it as Teraphim. In other instances, it calls them household gods or idols. And the thinking of them was really broad, and we're going to look at this a little bit here. But would one of you guys take a look at Zechariah 10, verse 2?
Sure, I can. For the household gods utter nonsense, and the diviners see lies. They tell false dreams and give empty consolation. Therefore the people wander like sheep, and they are afflicted for lack of a shepherd.
So here God is wielding his power against the demonic, against the evil spirits. And in order to show his power over these false gods, these little g gods, he says that your household gods, your Teraphim, utter nonsense. Their answers are wrong. They're magicians, the ladies of the pit. They see lies. They tell false dreams. They give
they're
empty
answering.
consolation. But they're answering, yeah. It isn't that they have nothing to say. It's that their power is gone. It isn't that they've been stripped of a voice. It's that they no longer are allowed to know things that they once did know. This is the judgment of God. And I like the ending there. The people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for the lack of a shepherd. Now, to us, shepherd is almost always connected to Jesus.
Yep.
Here, this is an antichrist figure. This is an un-Jesus. Their shepherd were the powers, the gods of the nations that were shepherding them. These were the shields that they used to defend themselves. And here God has wielded his power against these fallen watchers, and they're scattered. At times, they seem to have had power. They seem to have really known things. And then something changed. They didn't. One of my favorite stories about the oracle at Delphi, and I love ancient culture, and you guys are going to, I hope, get a kick out of this, but the very last oracle that the oracle of Delphi gives me the chills, because it happens during the reign of a Roman emperor named Julian the Apostate. Julian had grown up in a Christian family. This is after Christianity has taken hold of the Roman Empire.
2nd century.
Yeah, it's around then. And he wants to bring Rome back into paganism. And so he wants to bring back the gods of the ancient world. And so he sends a representative to the oracle at Delphi and says, ask the goddess, what I should do. And instead, what he comes back with, it's not very encouraging. This is what the oracle says. Tell the emperor that the didactic hall has fallen, that Phobius no longer has his chamber, nor his mantic laurel. The prophetic spring and the speaking waters have been silenced.
That's awesome.
It's almost like a spiritual power went through and laid waste to the
Clean
powers
house.
that were there.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great.
That the fortress, the demonic stronghold of Delphi, was flattened. Now, my question is, what would cause that to happen? And I think the answer is the resurrection of Jesus.
Yep.
What is going on here? After the resurrection of Jesus, things changed that had power on the earth are stripped of their power. Things that once had a chokehold on culture no longer did, and the gospel went forth like a fire that raged across the Roman Empire. These beings could not defend Julian the Apostate. And it's almost like that of like a broken warrior lying at the foot of the wall and saying, I can't help you. I can't help you. Our forces are destroyed. What do we have to throw against the might of Christ?
That's awesome.
Nothing. And to me, that is a powerful image of the spiritual victory of Christ over the powers of darkness. Not that they're not real, but that they are real, but unable to stand in the presence of Christ.
So what were these like household idols then? These, I always think of like trinkets and little statues or some ornaments we put on the tree. What were this? Were they reminders of a god?
In our culture today, we have things called headstones, right? And a headstone is a place that you write down the name of somebody, the date they were born, the day that they died, maybe a cutesy image or something, maybe a message. But this stone marks the place where the body lies. Ancient people were wanderers. They didn't always stay in the same place. And so if they're worshiping their ancestors, A gravestone is not really a great way to do that. And so what they would do is they would make little idols, little carvings of them that would look like grandpa, whatever, or grandma, whoever. And those beings were supposed to watch over the family. People would even, like we would put flowers on the grave, or the Jewish people would put stones on a grave. They would pour milk over these as a way of just showing honor. You know, if I could feed you, I would. And what could possibly have begun with benevolent intentions seems to have ultimately become necromancy in its darker forms. They are worshiping these beings, these gods, as protectors of the family and feeding them just like they're feeding the living members of their family. And so whoever possessed those idols, the Teraphim, he was the top of the family. He was the priest of the home. He was the one who was the keeper of the household gods. And some of these carvings seemed not to represent human relatives. Some of them seemed to represent spirits that they thought were connected to their family. I always think of like Mulan with like the little dragon like that went out. You know, this was one of the protectors of our family. That's not just a Chinese idea. That's a human idea. All across the place. We were just down at the mounds in Chillicothe, and we saw the same thing there with some of the effigies that the people there had created and placed into the mounds. But it's family worship of your ancestors, and also worship of familiar spirits, which, if you're connected to witchcraft and that kind of thing, familiar spirits is a very real thing. There's a reason that witches have cats in folklore, because it's not really a cat. It's a demonic being or some sort of spirit being that speaks to them. If you have friends who are involved in the New Age, they'll talk to you about familiar spirits or guide spirits who are there to walk them around, and they're worshiping them. They're worshiping them. There is one weird, odd instance in the Bible, and it has to do with Michal, David's wife, or Michal, or whatever you want to say, and she makes a really big one. And she puts it in her bed, and she says this is David, and she puts a wig on it, and everyone's like, oh, well, David's sick, so we'll run in there and we'll kill him. And when they break in, they find out it's just a giant teraphim. And so there they seem to have used the word as like an idol, an image. But teraphim are small, typically.
So, John, you connected it kind of with the idea of a headstone to us now. I know that's maybe just an analogy of how we would understand what it was for, but was the teraphim originally created as like a positive thing, as a remembrance type of thing?
We don't know.
And then it got tainted into this witchcraft stuff? Or
we don't know. If you were an optimist, you can say sure. If you're a pessimist, you can say no way. We just aren't told. This is something that was so common in the ancient world that they didn't feel the need to explain it. And since time has gone by, we just don't know for sure. We know that in the Bible, people are worshiping them. And that's bad. I don't think that was ever intended to be something that we were doing.
That ties in the idea of the worship. And what does the worship mean in the spiritual realm compared to our neck of the woods?
Well, even in our world, if you knew that someone was out in the graveyard by your house and was pouring blood offerings to a spirit there, it doesn't matter if grandma's buried there or not. You would associate that with evil, even though it's a stone. And, you know, some people leave flowers. I leave buckets of blood. You know, it's not the same. Even if people tried to make it the same, there is a real demonic spiritual evil that's at work here.
So another question that's kind of maybe a stretch with this, but that's what I'm here for, to stretch it out a little bit on there. So you were mentioning how it's like familiar people from the past, or the little effigies, the teraphim, were to watch over the family. Is that any connection to like everybody has a guardian angel type of idea? Or
yes.
I told you I was going to stretch it out a little bit.
Kind of, yeah. I think so. I have no chapter and verse. Do I think that is an unbroken chain of thoughts of protecting spirits? I do. Now, does the Bible talk about guardian angels? It does. For children. That's a very real thing, and we're going to get into this. But throughout all of human history, the idea that there are spirits interested in you and your family has been present the whole time. The whole time. even today.
Just not always for guarding.
Not always for guarding. Sometimes, yeah. I have no doubt that there are beings who are fans of Martin Lisner, and they want to help him to be a godly man. But I also think there are also beings who have watched your family a very long time, and they're set to destroy it, to pull it into the weeds. And so as a Christian, what do I do with that? And you guys can get into that, I hope, in your next rambling. But I simply want to point out that it's not weird. It's in the Bible. Well, it is weird, and it's in the Bible. But if you want to read about Michael's instance of that, you can check that out in 1 Samuel chapter 19. But Teraphim appear quite a bit. Probably the most interesting connection of I almost said cherubim, but Teraphim is in Genesis 31, 19 through 21. And Teraphim, remember, they're called household gods, and they're always talked about in plural. Always. There's never just one teraphim, or if it is just one, it still talks about them as a plural, as though this one thing represents many, kind of like one human who's possessed by legion, is the idea there. And this is an instance where Rachel is leaving her father Laban, and there's this really strange encounter. Now we're going to jump from 19 and 20 and 21. And then we're going to jump from 21 to 30. So if you've got the time to read this on your own, you should. But we have limited time here on the podcast, and we want to make sure we're moving through this text. Would one of you guys take a look at that?
Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban, the Aramean, by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead.
Now, at this point, Jacob gets away, and Laban comes home, finds out he's been tricked by Jacob, which is kind of weird because Laban is a great trickster and has already tricked him into marrying multiple daughters here. But at this point, Laban doesn't say, well, it's okay, he had to go. When he realizes that the household gods have been stolen, he acts as though it's a raid on his home. This is the most important thing he owns. His job to protect and guard these teraphim. And he flies after Jacob, almost like a war party. Take it up in verse 30.
It says, and now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house.
It says, and that part makes sense to me, but...
why did you steal my gods?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
That was well read, too. I like that.
You like that?
My gods!
Why?
Why would you do it? Now, here's the question. Is Laban only worshiping the God of Abraham? I don't think so. I think he is just as pagan as the other people around him. And Rachel grew up in this house. And so she's used to thinking of these beings as having power, as representing her family. But there's power in these beings, even in just the possession of them. The person who owns these figurines, these figures, is the head of the house, is the paterfamilias, is the chief. And so is it possible that she is taking these to lift up Jacob's power? It's possible. It's also possible that she intends to keep these so that when Leah, who is the first wife, starts talking trash about her, she can say, yes, but I have the teraphim. I am the chief wife. I have the power. And so these gods come into the family politics at play. There's a spiritual power, a spiritual connection to the family. These are dead family members. These are familiar spirits. And ultimately, they're a mystery to us. So I hate to say this, Gordon, but the answer to your question is, I don't know. And I've spent hours reading about it, and I know a lot more now, but I can't explain exactly what they meant to everybody because we just don't know. We do know that they're referenced here as my gods, and that implies worship. I think that Rachel is not the monotheist that everyone wishes that she was, especially at this point. She has come out of a pagan culture, and she doesn't know. She doesn't have the Exodus and the Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, maybe not even Genesis. None of that stuff exists yet. Well, definitely not Genesis because this is part of the book of Genesis. She just doesn't know. And so we can look back at this with, how dare you? Obviously, you wouldn't do that. But she's working without the benefit of Scripture. and she's making assumptions here. I think what she intended to do was to keep these powers. And this is the same stuff that Saul is working with later on by digging the pit, is localized in these little figurines. Did you watch Gladiator? You see that one? Like he's got like the little carvings like
of his family.
Of his family, and he's praying, that it's part of the ancient world, right down to the very bones of how this thing operated.
What if Rachel was like, I don't want my dad. I love him. He should not worship other gods. So I'm going to steal him so he can no longer do it. Just being the good daughter.
The optimist over here coming through. Yeah, I thought
well, here's the deal.
Thanks,
if
Martin.
that's the case, it's weird that she kept them.
Well,
she was like, I don't
instead
want
of
Dad to
hiding-
have this bag of heroin. I better take this
yeah.
with me and
It's
keep this
stash it
all the
Took
time.
one for the
somewhere.
team. Is what
Yeah,
it was.
she's using it. She is this whole story is one of deception, one of trickery. The whole Jacob story cycles around this,
Oh, yeah.
and Rachel is part of this game just as much as Jacob or Laban is.
Yeah. It's true.
Let's jump into 2 Kings, because we're going to find this again. Here, the keepers of the pit, or the people who are loyal to the woman of the pit. And it's part of the Josiah sequence. In 2 Kings 23, verses 24 through 25. Nick, do you mind reading that?
Moreover, Josiah put away the mediums and necromancers and the household gods and the idols and all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, that he might establish the words of the law that were written in the book of Hilkiah the priest, found in the house of the Lord. Before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, with all his soul, and with all his might, according to all the law of Moses, nor did any like him arise after him.
So I want you to notice that here it connects that idea of mediums and necromancy with the household gods, with the idols. And it says that this is a man who was loyal to God with all of his heart, implying that he wasn't wavering between the two. To him, there was only the Lord, and these other gods were not welcome in the territory of Israel. This, I think, gives me the answer that I'm looking for. These were pagan items. Was there a time when possibly they had good connections? Maybe. Is it possible that it could be used just to refer to a figurine? Probably. That seems to be the case with Michael. But on the whole, it connects to the pagan gods and goddesses of the underworld or of your ancestors. They're associated with necromancy, with wizardry, the knowing ones. And one of the marks of the revival here is that they're removed. Can a Christian both love Jesus and seek answers from the darkness? Can you be loyal to Christ and willing to play with the demonic world?
Cannot serve two masters.
I hope you guys get into this in the rambling, and you're able to talk about this practically. And it's kind of my hope that we're going to do with the ramblings is that we'll interact a little bit with the teachings that are laid out here. I have one last text, and this is New Testament. Okay, so for everyone out there who's like, oh, always in the Old Testament, give me some New Testament goodness. This one comes from 1 Peter, chapter 3, verses 18 through 22. I'm preaching through 1 Peter, and I can't wait till I get to here 8 years from now.
I was going to say, this is a
when
long
I
ways
get
from
there.
where you're at.
I'm moving through this text. I'm having a really good time, and I don't want to rush it. But Mr. Listener, would you take that one?
Yeah. 1 Peter 3:18 through 22. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison.
Okay, hang on. So here he goes and proclaims to the spirits in the underworld. Why?
Because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers being subjected to him.
This is Jesus. Did Jesus descend into the realm of the dead?
Yes.
Absolutely he did. And while he was there, he broke them. What power they had seems to be stripped. Later on, it says he took captivity captive. He marched them in a triumphal entry. This is what I think the oracle at Delphi was trying to say. We are destroyed. What power we had, we have to regroup. We have to rethink how to do this because our strongholds are broken. Now, they would go down into the pit to seek an answer to their problems, salvation from something that was wrong. The Christian, though, we don't seek the powers around us. We don't seek the divine dead. We go into the waters of baptism, and we proclaim our loyalty to the court of heaven, and we are buried in likeness of him and raised to walk in newness of life. To us, we do not worship the gods of this world. We are not loyal to them, but this baptism that we've done is a declaration. It is an oath that we are loyal to one God and one God only. And he is at the right hand of the Father, and the angels, the authorities, and the powers are subject to him. So, long story short, Saul is an idiot because he is trying to mix the supernatural world with the loyalty to Yahweh. And you cannot be loyal to God and loyal to the demonic world at the same time.
He's desperate. I mean, God's not answering him, and he knows why. I mean, ultimately, so it's not going to, I'm not going to some ghost for an answer. I'm going to try to find somebody who gave me answers from God to see if I can manipulate.
One guy.
Yeah, I got to control. I got to, so yeah, it's a sad story. But Matt, there's so many things that are unlocked here that are questions that are given to. But I love this First Peter passage. It's like he goes down and overcomes. He makes this proclamation. He snatches the keys of death and returns, and everything has changed now. And I thought, not that the gospel is not beautiful, but there's something more that's happening.
In the Gospels, we are given the earthly image of what happened.
Yeah.
But we are not given the supernatural realms version of what was occurring. When the temple veil splits from top to bottom, when the dead rise up and walk back into Jerusalem preaching the resurrected Christ,
the earth cracks.
When the sky goes black and the earth rips open, what is happening?
Mm-hmm.
What was going on there? When you die and go to heaven, my friend, you need to get in line and be like, okay, I need some eyewitness accounts of how this shook loose because I got to know.
Yeah.
We are simply told it happened. And we get little glimpses, little windows into it, but we're not supposed to worry about it because it's not about me figuring it out and making sure that it's working. It's about my trust in Jesus. He is the one who protects us.
The weird part for me, as I think about all this, they're trying to manipulate these powers to come inhabit these statues or whatever to manipulate. And Jesus' intention the whole time, God's intention the whole time was to inhabit the believer to his image or his. We're not to make him anything in his image because we are.
We are to image him.
It blows my mind when you start to think that way, and it just I don't even know where it makes my mind go, but I just can't wrap my head around it fully. It's a beautiful thing. It's an amazing thing, really.
Well, I would encourage you guys, take some time and think about this.
Yeah, the rambling will be good.
I would really like to. I probably am going to download it and be like as giddy as I can be because I'm curious to hear you guys and where you go with this. And I hope this hasn't weirded you out, but I think it's important for you to know the background before you make assumptions about how to use this information.
And thanks to Gordon. It was a great
Yeah,
idea
Gordon,
to talk about.
Huge thank you to you. I had hours of fun reading this. You definitely creeped me out, though, as I wound up in like blood-soaked pits and reading some of the incantations and stuff was raising the hair on my arms. I was like, I don't know if I want to read this in my house. Like, I should go out to the garage or something to
See,
say
I
this out loud.
liked reading it.
You would, man. You're weird. Nick has seen every horror film that exists.
This all makes sense. I've seen this
right.
before. Yeah.
It's coming out.
So what I'm trying to tell you is that Jesus is the God of gods,
Amen.
the Lord of lords, the Lord mighty and awesome.